We are delighted to introduce Lost and Found in Adaptations. This session is presented by ABP Live. Singh Choudhary is an award-winning author, journalist, filmmaker, and screenwriter who has worked across several forms of media and is known for her books Neela Scarf, Mama Ki Diary, and shows like The Good Girl Show and the wildly success Aarya. She has also translated renowned titles by writers such as Paulo Coelho, Perumal, Murugan, and Namita Gokhale from English to Hindi. Filmmaker and journalist Vinod Kapri is known for his critically acclaimed films Can't Take This Shit Anymore, Pihu, and his latest groundbreaking documentary on migrant workers and their devastating journeys home following the COVID outbreak and lockdown. 1232 kilometers, 1,232 kilometers. Farrukh Dhondy is a legendary author, playwright, screenwriter, and activist. His translations of the poems of Jalaluddin Rumi is celebrated for its touch of modern sensibility and simultaneous faithfulness to Rumi's originals. In conversation with the Joint Secretary in Government of India, Ministry of Culture, and Director in the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Nirupama Kotru, and the visionaries of multimedia come together to discuss their craft, the art of adaptation, and the wild canvas of expressions beneath. May I now invite Vinod Kapri. Farrukh Dhondy is running late, so he will join later on. And, oh, he's here. Farrukh Dhondy, welcome, welcome, please come. And Nirupama Kotru on stage. Singh Choudhary is with us virtually on the screen. Lost and Found in Adaptations.
Namaskar, Adab, good afternoon, and very warm welcome to the session. I'm really excited to be moderating this session with a very eminent panel. We have Farrukh Dhondy sir, who doesn't need any introduction. In fact, I would call him the Bhishma Pitama of the session because he's a master of adaptations. As we say in Hindi, inke baएं haath ka khel hai. So we'll hear more about his work soon. We also have Vinod Kapri ji. He was introduced to you as a filmmaker and author. We'll come to his journey shortly. And Singh Choudhary, who's joining us via video link. So just to set the context, the session is called Lost and Found in Adaptations. Why it is titled like this is that all of us know adaptations can be very challenging. You know, very often you hear the book was better. So that's the most popular kind of adaptation, of course, which we know about, adapting a book to a film or a theatrical production, which a lot of work Farrukh sir has done in that regard. You also have sometimes plays adapted into film, like famous example of Pygmalion is there, which was adapted into My Fair Lady. Then you have epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata, which were made into television series. B.R. Chopra's and B.R. Chopra and Ramanand Sagar is very popular. And of course, I mean, there are some examples where good literature, for example, there was the Nayi Kahani movement in Hindi literature, many of you may be familiar with. And Basu Chatterjee, being an excellent screenwriter himself, he adapted some stories into very good films. The first one was Sara Akash, which of course all of you know about, based on a short story, and then Manu Bhandari's Yahi Sach Hai, which he made into Rajnigandha. So we have excellent examples of very successful adaptations, but we want to know from our panelists what are the kind of challenges they face when they actually take up the task of adaptation. So we'll start with Farrukh sir. So I want to ask you, let's start with Shakespeare, which is one of our favorite kind of adaptations. All of us love these cinematic adaptations of Shakespeare. So you had told me when we were conversing about preparing for the session that you have in fact adapted 4 Shakespearean plays, Merchant of Venice, The Tempest, Othello, and Hamlet into modern Indian stories. So we'd like to hear something about that. And you've also adapted King Lear for a play based on the Mumbai film industry, which really was kind of, I mean, astonishing to hear. So I would, if you would love to hear about that, sir. And the next part of my question pertains to this very interesting trilogy which Vishal Bhardwaj has done, which all of you know about. So in fact, Farooq sir was, he had given his expert advice and consultation to Vishal and Abbas Dairwala for Maqbool. So he will tell us also what the process was of adaptation, what were the challenges. Over to you, sir. Please.
Well, adaptation तरह तरह के होते because ये शब्द it can be used in very many ways, right? A translation is an adaptation. तो मैंने रूमी को translate कर दिया into English with rhyme and meter because I don't know much Persian. I can ask for naan or I can say Hale Shomakhu, but I don't know terribly much about it. But my Mamaji used to feed me the Persian lines, tell me their meaning, and I turn them into thing. The difficulty of that is to take the consciousness of the 13th century Persia, of Konya, of Turkey, and turn it into the consciousness of today's world. And that doesn't mean that you take American idiom of today, the American ghetto idiom, and apply it and translate. That would completely violate the translating process. But you've got to try and think what will reverberate as the cultural equivalent of what Rumi is trying to say then. I mean, a few things don't change. Spirit doesn't change. 13th century, 21st century, spirit ek hi cheez hai. If you say Khudawan Karim, if you say Bhagwan, if you say Aura Mazda, it means the same. You say Allah or Elohi, it means the same thing in different cultures. Over the centuries, God doesn't change it. So much of the Masnavi of Rumi is about God, about the self-realization, spiritual and so on. But you wanted me to talk about Bollywood and Hollywood and how they adapt Shakespeare into modern times. One of the first Shakespeare modifications I saw, adaptations, was West Side Story. And as soon as you see West Side Story, they are gangs in New York fighting each other. It's an adaptation. I didn't know that when I went to see it, the film. But I realized as soon as I saw it, this is Romeo and Juliet. Now, when Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet, it was about aristocrats, aristocratic families, the Montagues and the Capulets, right? And the arbiter of those is the Duke. In West Side Story, it's brought right down in the social scale. And so the arbiter is not a duke, but he's an idiot New York policeman. And so the people sing to him, Officer Krupke, we're down on our knees. No one wants a fellow with a social disease. So you can adapt from one high society to the lowest, but the story remains the same. And the charm of Romeo and Juliet remains the same. So that was the first adaptation I saw. Then I was invited by the producer, Bobby Bedi, to be a script editor on Macbeth being transformed by Vishal Bhardwaj, into Maqbool. Yeah. That's right. Macbeth. So I script edited Maqbool. And I read this first draft of the script. Script editors don't have much to do. You got challenge the writers and so forth. And they had, instead of the 3 witches, they had 3 policemen. And the policemen could predict what was going to happen in the gangs of the Bombay Mafia. So मैंने पहला सवाल पूछा उनको. I said कि यार Macbeth में Shakespeare had these people either having supernatural powers, the witches, right? And they got things from astronomical or spells and stuff that they did. Yeah, but these policemen, how do they know what's going to happen, right? And they said कि यार हमने horoscope तो दिखाया. So I said ठीक है, लेकिन horoscope भी होते हैं और police informers भी होते हैं मुंबई में. So you've got to decide whether it's supernatural horoscope or police information that is giving them the lowdown on what's going on in the mafia gangs of Bombay. So I just left them with the question to decide, right? And of course they adapted the play, but there were things like that which one has to, as an editor, point out in an adaptation.
But he did very well with Pandit and Purohit,
Yes.
played by Om Puri and Nasruddin Shah. It came
That's
out
right.
so well.
That's right. Yeah, and
it
they
came out
did.
so well.
He did two more. He did Hamlet,
Yes.
which I had nothing.
Heather,
Yeah.
yes.
But I saw them. Okay.
And what about your own adaptations, which
what-
you have done?
sorry?
You have done King Lear, which you have adapted to the Mumbai
yeah,
film industry.
See, I was asked by a London theatre to provide monologues for female actors, right? And the first thing I thought of, or perhaps the second thing I thought of, I don't know, was take 3 of Shakespeare's plays and turn them into modern stories and give them to a female actor to speak. So, you know, the story of Hamlet is a boy is told by the ghost of his father that your mother and your uncle killed me because they wanted to get married and inherit the kingdom and so on and so forth. And I turned that into a story set in Calcutta, but the story is told by Gayatri instead of Gertrude, the mother of Hamlet, and she tells the story from her point of view. कि ये इस story में क्या हुआ था? Yeah. So also with the other stories, The Tempest is a strange story about, you know, people on an island and Caliban, a Badmash and so on. And I turned it into a ghost story told through the mouth of an actress who goes to play Miranda, and the monologue is called Miranda. Uske baad, there was Othello, in which, you know, in the original, the girl falls in love with a soldier, Othello, a black man. A white woman falls in love with a black man. And so I had a builder's daughter falling in love with a Trinidadian security officer that her father hires to keep a guard on, you know, building sites mein jhagda hota hai Bombay mein. So he finds this Trinidad who's just come out of jail for smuggling drugs, and some incident takes place, and the father says, "You look like a tough guy. Will you be my security guard on the building site?" So she falls in love with him, but then she doesn't really fall in love with him. She's actually deceiving him. So you twist the story to adapt it. Now, King Lear was the biggest adaptation I've done, and it was performed as a play in London, Edinburgh, Yawa. Abhi koshиш bhi kar raha hu ki usko film bana do, but nobody wants it.
But how did the audience react to the idea of it being
King
set
Lear
in
is a story about a king who decides to resign, and he says कि मेरी बेटियां को पूरा मेरा empire दे देता हूँ भाग भाग करके 3 बार, and he says कि who loves me most, and 2 of the daughters say we love you like hell, तो उनको भाग दे देता है. The third one says यार ये सारे झूठ बोल रहे, when I get married I love my husband more than I love my father, all this sort of thing. And he says get out of my sight, तुझे कुछ नहीं मिलने वाला. I thought that's a great beginning for a story. So let's say a big Bollywood mogul decides, कोई नाम नहीं ले रहा हूँ, but decides to resign, and he says 3 बेटियां को बुलाती है, and he says कि बताइए आप क्या सोचते मेरे career में, this and the other, And the first two say, you're fantastic, you've done the best thing in the world, this, that. So, तुझे वो film city के studio तेरे हाथ में. Yeah. Second one says this and that. Or studio or pura music rights तेरे हाथ में. Tisri beti has been educated in England film school. And she steps forward and says कि तुम लोगों ने Bollywood से पूरा revolutionary potential of India बिगाड़ दिया by selling these stupid dreams, these idiotic dances, yeah, and these I could use stronger words, but ये गाने शाने करते पूरा consciousness बिगाड़ दिया India का. And he says कि यार हट जा मेरे से, go away, you get nothing, right? And then the story progresses in the way that the two daughters who inherited, they betray him. Yeah, they say, "Daddy, don't interfere." He can't give up interfering. He keeps saying, "Music ऐसे नहीं होना चाहिए, ऐसे." Said, "यार, तेरा क्या है? तेरा हक है या? We own the place now. Go away." He gets very angry with those daughters, and then he goes out with his chamcha, because in King Lear there's a fool. And so, of course, in the Indian context, the fool becomes a chamcha. So chamcha uske saath jata hai. He said कि मैं इनके साथ नहीं आऊँगा, मैं ये घर-वर छोड़ के चला जाता हूँ. Now, in King Lear, he wanders into a storm, right? And I thought storm क्या हो सकता, monsoon हो सकता. I said, नहीं, that's not exciting. The storm in my story is the poverty of India. So he goes to the villages, to the dehato, and in his films he has all shown कि देहाती बड़े दिल के होते हैं, जहाँ दिल में सफाई होती है, होठों पे सच्चाई होती है, हम उस देश के वासी हैं. This kind of thing he has demonstrated, and he finds that the dehatis are as much chor as chor and badmash and matlabi as city people. So he suffers the storm of India's poverty. तो वो दिखा. आखिरी में एक twist है film में. It is, we learn only in the last scene that all this is filmy dhong. The entire story was written by the youngest daughter's husband, who is a writer. And that's why the King Lear adaptation is called, in imitation of Bollywood's dhong, it's called film, film, film.
What a wonderful story.
What is
really fascinating. I hope we get to
क्या ढोंग है और
here.
क्या हकीकत है? That's the confusion in the story.
Okay, so I think we are having a bit of an issue connecting Anu. So we'll go to she won't be okay. Sorry, technology can be very tricky sometimes. So Anu couldn't be here today, but we carry on now. Vinod ji, coming to your own journey, आपका जो सफर है थोड़ा सा अलग रहा है फारूक सर से और अनु जी से. As we all know, he's made a lot of films, acclaimed films like Miss Tanakpur Hazir Ho and Pihu. But his latest documentary is very interesting. What he did is that COVID की महामारी के दौर में इन्होंने जो हमारे migrant laborers थे, उनकी journey को पूरा document किया, shoot किया, और उस footage से इन्होंने पहले documentary बनाई. But then he realized that he was not satisfied because he had done a lot of research, he had a lot of footage. तो मुझे जहाँ तक समझ में आता है, विनोद और बताएंगे इस बारे में, तो फिर इन्होंने उसी अपनी जो रिसर्च थी उसके बेसिस पे अपनी बुक बनाई जो अभी हाल में रिलीज हुई है. तो विनोद, अपने इस रियली फैसिनेटिंग और डिफरेंट जो आपकी जर्नी और फिर एडेप्टेशन थी फ्रॉम फिल्म टू बुक, इसके बारे में प्लीज बताएं.
मेरे ख्याल से अभी तक जो whatever the Farrukh Saab has said, so we have only heard about adaptation from books to film so far. So when I conceived this idea of documenting the journey of these 7 migrant laborers, उस वक्त मेरे जहन में सिर्फ इतना ही था क्योंकि primarily I'm a storyteller, filmmaker or a documentary filmmaker. So initially my thought was only to make a film to document their journey. So I was with them for 7 days and 8 nights, 7 nights and 8 days. It was a journey from Ghaziabad to Saharsa. They were completely on their own. साइकिल में वो लोग गए थे, 7 मजदूर. तो उस जर्नी को करने के बाद when I came back home and we started editing the film. So while editing the film, मुझे realize हुआ कि you know इस सफर में बहुत कुछ उन लोगों ने ऐसा भी सफर किया है जो मेरी डॉक्यूमेंट्री में अधूरा रहेगा, जो डॉक्यूमेंट्री में मैं दिखा नहीं पाया हूँ, जो मैं फिल्म में दिखा नहीं पाया हूँ. तो मैं आपको 2-3 उसके उदाहरण देना चाहूंगा, जो जिसके बाद मुझे लगा कि ये कहानी एक किताब के तौर पे कहना क्यों जरूरी है. और उसी के बाद फिर ये इंग्लिश में हापर कॉलिंस से आई, फिर हिंदी में है, फिर तमिल, कन्नड़ और कई भाषाओं में अभी वो किताब एक के बाद एक करके आ रही है. तो उस जो इंसिडेंट्स थे वो कुछ ऐसे इंसिडेंट्स थे जिसको मुझे लगा कि मैं डॉक्यूमेंट में या अपनी फिल्म में शायद उसको उनके साथ इंसाफ नहीं कर पा रहा हूँ, उस यात्रा का उनके साथ इंसाफ नहीं हो पा रहा है फारूक साहब. तो उसमें जैसे ये लोगों के साथ सुबह से लेकर शाम तक लोग भूखे रहते थे और इनको खाना नहीं मिलता था. तो रात का एक वक्त था जब ये लोग अलग अलग ढाबों में जा रहे थे और इनको कहीं पर भी कोई ढाबे वाला इनको रोक कर ना इनको रुकने की जगह दे रहा था, ना इनको खाने की दे रहा था, क्योंकि इनको लग रहा था कि ये लोग दिल्ली और एनसीआर से आ रहे हैं और ये जरूर कुछ ना कुछ अपने साथ में कोविड का वायरस लेके आए होंगे, तो इनको जगह नहीं मिल रही थी. तो इन लोगों ने आपस में तय किया कि अब हम लोग कहीं भी जाएंगे तो खाना नहीं मांगेंगे, हम सिर्फ अपने लिए रुकने की जगह मांगेंगे, क्योंकि खाना मांगते हैं तो फिर हमको रुकने की जगह नहीं मिलेगी, तो हमारे पास अब ऑप्शन कुछ नहीं बचा है. तो ये यहाँ तक तो मैंने डॉक्यूमेंट किया, लेकिन उसके बाद जब उन्होंने एक जगह पे सिर्फ अपने लिए रुकने की जगह मांगी कि हमको सिर्फ आप रात को रुकने की छत दे दीजिए, जो उनकी बाहर की जगह थी, एक बड़ा सा लॉन था, वहां पर आप उनको सोने दीजिए, ढाबे वाले को कहा. तो यहाँ तक मैंने डॉक्यूमेंट किया, लेकिन मैं उसके बाद मैं अपनी टीम के साथ हम लोग कार में सो गए. लेकिन अगले दिन जब सुबह उन्होंने बताया तो उन्होंने मुझे बताया कि सर हमको रात को बहुत भूख लगी और हम लोगों को समझ में नहीं आ रहा था हम क्या करें. तो मैंने कहा फिर क्या किया तुम लोगों ने? तो उन्होंने कहा कि रात को जब ये लोग सब सो गए थे तो ये जो ढाबे वाले का ये जो डस्टबिन है बहुत बड़ा, यहाँ पे इसकी बहुत सारी रोटियां रखी हुई थी, बहुत सारा बासी खाना इन लोगों ने फेंक दिया था, जो अलग अलग पुलिस के लोग आकर खा के चले गए थे, जिसमें से कुछ बच गया था. तो वो हम लोगों ने निकाला और उसके बाद तो हम सब लोगों ने खाया रात में. सो यू नो दैट वाज द स्टोरी व्हिच दे टोल्ड मी नेक्स्ट मॉर्निंग. सो मुझे लगा कि अब ऐसी बहुत सारी कहानियां, इसी तरह का एक हादसा इनके साथ हुआ जब ये लोग गंगा नदी पार करने वाले थे और इनको पुलिस मार रही थी और इनको दे वर नॉट अलाउड बिकॉज यू नो उस वक्त लॉकडाउन था और पुलिस सख्ती कितनी ज्यादा थी आप सब लोगों को पता है, खासतौर पे पहले लॉकडाउन में. तो पुलिस वालों ने इनसे कहा कि आप लोग वापस जाइए, मैं आपको यहाँ से आगे जाने नहीं दूंगा. देयर इज अ प्लेस कॉल्ड ब्रिजघाट नियर मुरादाबाद और वहीं पर एक गंगा नदी है जो बहुत बड़ी, बहुत विशाल आकार में वहां पर है. तो पुलिस ने उनसे कहा कि आप जा नहीं सकते आगे, इसके आगे बैरिकेड है, इसके आगे हम आपको जाने नहीं देंगे. अब इन लोगों के पास एक धर्म संकट था कि पीछे जाएं 80 किलोमीटर, जहां से आप मकान मालिक इनको वापस नहीं आने देगा, या ये आगे जाए. तो इन लोगों ने तय किया कि ये लोग अपनी साइकिल समेत गंगा को पार करेंगे और ये सब सातों के सातों लोग साइकिल लेकर के गंगा में चले गए. और तब एक जो वहां पर बोटमैन था उसने देखा, उससे पहले इन लोगों ने बहुत विनती की थी कि भाई तुम हमको ले जाओ, तो वो भी पुलिस के डर से उसने मना किया कि नहीं, आई कांट डू दिस, आई कांट हेल्प यू बिकॉज पुलिस इज बीटिंग अस. तो उसने उन लोगों को मना कर दिया. तो उसके बाद इनका कोई रास्ता बचा नहीं था, तो इन्होंने तय किया कि हम लोग साइकिल समेत गंगा को पार करेंगे. अब ये जो कहानी है, ये कहानी मैं डॉक्यूमेंट नहीं कर पाया क्योंकि जब ये लोगों ने when they started their journey, I was not initially for initial few hours, I was not part of their journey because they did inform me that they are going out, they are just going to Saharsa. So I was not part of the journey, but they informed me later कि ये रात को हमारे साथ next morning ये हुआ था जिसमें हम लोगों ने गंगा नदी पार करने की कोशिश की एंड उसके बाद जो वहां पर मछुआरे थे उनको हम पर दया आई एंड दे हेल्प्ड अस. उसके बाद उन्होंने अपनी नाव से हम लोगों को गंगा पार कराए. तो ऐसे बहुत सारे इंसिडेंट पूरी यात्रा में सफर में हुए जो मैं डॉक्यूमेंट्री में कर नहीं पाया. तो मुझे लगा कि एक किताब में इसका होना बहुत जरूरी है तो इसीलिए फिल्म के बाद मैंने किताब का फैसला किया।
बहुत खूब. I mean, we are really excited to read your book and watch your documentary, because it's really a remarkable human story, a story for our times. I mean, we have gone through so much in the last 2 years, so it was very important to document this.
Thank you.
Moving on to slightly more pleasant topics, because it's a really sad story which you have captured so nicely in your documentary. So when we talk of adaptations, Farrukh Sahab, this is for you. देवदास का नाम हमेशा आता है सामने, देवदास. So as we all know, Devdas is possibly the most adapted story in India. We have 14 film adaptations in 7 Indian languages. In fact, P. Barua, जो Assamese director थे, उन्होंने 3 versions देवदास के ही बनाए, talkie versions. इसमें एक, of course, KL सहगल की बड़ी famous थी, और फिर बिमल रॉय साहब ने बनाई, बहुत ही बढ़िया award winning फिल्म. तो आप इसका एक अडेप्टेशन कर रहे हैं, मैंने सुना है, देवदास का, जो सेट है लंदन में, और वो भी हिप्पी एरा में, 1960s. So how does that play out? Because it sounds really fascinating.
Of course, मैंने देवदास की दोनों फिल्म देखी. पहली जो फिल्म थी, it was a classic, right? दूसरी फिल्म तो it occurred to me कि मेरा पियानो तेरा ग्रैंड पियानो से बड़ा है, वैसा. It wasn't very impressive. But देवदास की स्टोरी पूरा हिंदुस्तान जानते हैं. A Bengali Bangladeshi director, quite famous in London, came to me and said कि यार ये लंदन थिएटर को एक प्ले चाहिए, तो आप देवदास का adaptation कर सकते. I wouldn't have thought of it myself. I wouldn't have done it spontaneously. लेकिन commission मिल गया तो जो पैसे हाथ में आए बस करते. So I said, okay, I'll read the story again and I'll adapt it. तो adaptation हुआ hippie era में. It occurred to me कि ये he's an alcoholic, वो दारू पीता है, वो गंजेरी भी हो सकता है. He could, be a drug addict of the 1960s hippie era. और उसकी girlfriend है a white girl who is also a hippie, this, that, and the other. But then he discovers his old Bengali childhood friend who has come from Bangladesh, from Dhaka, to be a nurse in London. So वैसी story, one had to adapt to that era and that circumstance. But the story goes in the same direction, love and breakage and this and that. So usko musical bana di, and we wrote the songs for that. And it worked in the London theaters. So wahan wo chalaya. The Mukul was so impressed that he liked it. He made, I suppose it had good audiences. So he came to me and said, "Ke aur kuch adaptation kar sakte hain?" So I said, "Haan, for Bangladesh," because he then took it to Dhaka and to Calcutta. He translated it into Bengali, even the hippie era wala, thoda sa Angrezi, Bengali Gana, and took it to Dhaka, took it to Calcutta. So many here, but I suppose it was played out there. I've seen some shots of it on screen. And then he said, "Ki kuch aur ho sakta hai?" I said, "Ye Goethe ki story hai, Faust, jisme he sells his soul to the devil, right? Or this strikes me as a good story for Bangladesh, right? So I set it in a capitalist house in Bangladesh. So माँ बहन है, बाप नहीं है, और एक बेटा है, and he is Faust. Yeah. तो मुसलमान नाम दिया था उसको, and he sells his soul for in today's world, he sells his soul for capital gain, right? Not for the Faustian formula. So, and he doesn't sell it to the devil. The devil is capitalism. And Bangladesh is being inclined that way. So, but the clash in Bangladesh really is the clash between progress in a capitalistic way and religion, right, in the Islamic way, which is quite fundamentalist in some senses. And the third, of course, is Bengali culture, right? Islam says कि गाना मत गाओ, but Bengalis can't live without music, as we know.
Nazrul
So,
Geet is part of their culture.
So there is
Nazrul Geet,
the
yes.
narrative of Bangladesh is a clash between these three things. Progressive development, Islam, fundamentalist Islam, and ancient Bengali, natural Bengali culture. तो उसमें से कहानी बनाई Faust की, and that worked quite well. तीसरी कहानी, but that's not an adaptation at all. That was he came to me saying कि यार कुछ और Bangladesh. So for this month we wrote, because it's the anniversary of Bangladesh, of the creation of Bangladesh. Wrote a play called To Father a Nation, Mujib ke bare mein, about how it came about.
Wonderful, fascinating. So we have some time before we can start taking audience questions. So one question I want Vinod you to weigh in as well. I started by saying, I was recollecting Basu Chatterjee's phenomenal films, but I truly, for one, feel it's a shame that so much of rich Indian literature that we have is not picked up by filmmakers for making films. I mean, you take the same formula, we have such wonderful literature. I'm reminded of the time when Phaneshwar Nath Renu, he collaborated with Shailendra for his own short story Mare Gaye Gul Farm, and they made it into Tisri Kasam. The film absolutely sank at the box office, and Shailendra was a broken man. So they took a huge risk. But do you really think it's the fear of commercial failure that keeps filmmakers from taking up good literature? I mean, do you think they're just very comfortable working within those formulae? The typical stories, as somebody has said, there are only 5 basic plots. One is a love story, one is a revenge. So why aren't we seeing more Indian literature being adapted for film, if not theater? Theater, of course, is far more progressive, thank God.
मुझे एक किस्सा याद आ रहा है. एक बार मुझे अनुराग कश्यप ने बताया कि उन्होंने ऐसी मजे लेने के लिए जो अलग अलग स्टूडियोज होते हैं बॉम्बे में, जो आपकी फिल्म को फाइनेंस करते हैं और प्रमोट करते हैं, उसके बाद आपकी फिल्म को फंड करते हैं, तो उनको एक कहानी भेज दी थी, और वो बड़ी अमर कहानी है. उस कहानी का नाम है कफन.
प्रेमचंद.
हाँ, तो उस कहानी को भेज दिया था. उसके बाद स्टूडियो ने कहा कि ये जो राइटर है, इनका जरा सीवी भी भेज दीजिएगा, इन्होंने और क्या क्या काम किया है. तो ये किस्सा उन्होंने मुझे सुनाया. उन्होंने कहा कि ये हालत है हमारी जो हिंदी फिल्म इंडस्ट्री,
प्रेमचंद को पढ़ते नहीं है
कि न उनको पता है कि प्रेमचंद कौन है, ना उनको पता है कि हिंदी में क्या क्या काम हुआ है, लिटरेचर में क्या क्या काम हुआ है. तो जो दुर्भाग्य है और उसमें यह है कि हमारे स्टूडियोज के साथ में और फिल्मकारों के साथ में भी बहुत गिने चुने फिल्मकार हैं और गिने चुने लोग हैं जो इतना, फारूक साहब जैसे लोग जो इतना कुछ लिटरेचर के बारे में, देश काल परिस्थिति और के बारे में जानते हैं. विशाल जैसे लोग हैं जो इतना सब कुछ समझते हैं. इसीलिए शायद हम सिनेमा में बहुत कम प्रयोग इस तरह के देख पा रहे हैं भारतीय सिनेमा में. हम लोग जो देख रहे हैं वो अब तो जो लगातार देख रहे हैं वो जो देख रहे हैं मलयालम सिनेमा, तेलुगु सिनेमा में जो फिल्में बन रही हैं उसको आप सिर्फ रीमेक कर रहे हैं. एक एक सीन, शॉट तक आप बिल्कुल आप देख रहे होंगे कि शॉट भी बदलते नहीं है, वो इवन कॉस्ट्यूम भी नहीं बदलते हैं, कुछ नहीं बदलते, सब कुछ एज इट इज रीमेक कर रहे हैं. सो हिंदी सिनेमा की यही एक दिक्कत है कि आज हम लोग लिटरेचर की तरफ बिल्कुल ध्यान नहीं दे पा रहे हैं.
Farrukh sir, would you like to respond to that?
Sorry?
Would you like to respond to that?
I think he said it all. Okay. सब कुछ कहा आपने.
It really saddens me to hear that people who are not familiar with Premchand's Kafan. It's actually a shocking state of affairs. So we have enough time for questions, because I'm sure many of you have questions for Farrukh sir. So could we please pass on the mic to the audience? Mic? Yeah. Starting with, yes, the gentleman at the back. Yes.
So Hi.
Sure.
I just want to ask you that how important it is in today's era to have that adaptation. Because here, like when the pandemic hit us, we were not aware of all the, unemployment and all that. So how important it is to have that adaptation in today's world?
No, what did you say when the pandemic hit?
Yeah. So
Acha, so this
after
is for
that, a lot
Vinod.
of people got unemployed, right?
Okay.
Just
So your
want to
question
know.
is for Vinod, I think, right?
Or both the guys.
Okay. So he's asking about the pandemic and जो आपने किया, how important is it for such adaptations to so that people come to know what happened during the pandemic, especially जो ये हुआ ना कोविड का. मतलब वो कह रहे हैं कि adaptations की अहमियत क्या है आज की दुनिया में, जैसे आपने किया ना डॉक्यूमेंट्री से बुक में पैंडेमिक को लेके खास
नहीं, मुझे व्हाट आई फील आपका सवाल मुझे अभी थोड़ी अब समझ में आया, शायद मैं अभी ठीक से नहीं समझ पाया, लेकिन फिर भी आई ट्राई टू एक्सप्लेन. मुझे लगता है कि जब आप खासतौर पे पैंडेमिक जैसी चीज जो कि 100-200 साल में एक बार हम लोग एक मानव इतिहास में हम लोग उसको देखते हैं 100-200 साल में एक बार आती है, तो मैं अपनी कहानी का अगर जिक्र करूं तो मुझे लगता है कि इस तरह की कहानी को जिस भी रूप से उसको कहा जा सकता है कहा जाना चाहिए, चाहे आप उसको फिल्म के जरिए कहें, चाहे आप उसको किताब के जरिए कहें, चाहे आप उसको कविता के जरिए कहें, चाहे उसके आप अलग अलग तरह से न्यूज क्लिपिंग्स के जरिए कहें, और उसको जितनी भी तरीके से अडेप्ट किया जा सकता है उसको किया जाना चाहिए. और क्योंकि ये एक ऐसी दिक्कत थी, एक ऐसा दौर हम सब लोगों ने देखा, हम लोग सब लोगों ने उसको महसूस किया, जिसको ज्यादा से ज्यादा लोगों तक पहुंचना बहुत जरूरी है. और खासतौर पे उस माहौल में उन लोगों के बारे में जिन लोगों को जो हमारे घर बनाते हैं, जो हमारी जिस हॉल में इस वक्त आप बैठे हैं, इस हॉल में बैठने से पहले वो कौन से लोग थे जिन्होंने इस हॉल को साफ किया होगा, वो कौन से लोग थे जो इस हॉल की जो आप इतनी रोशनी देख रहे हैं उस रोशनी को लगाया होगा. हम लोग इनके बारे में जानते नहीं, हम लोग इनके नाम नहीं पता, और यही लोग पैंडेमिक में सबसे पहले शिकार हुए थे, सबसे पहले इनकी नौकरियां गई थी, सबसे पहले इन्हीं को अपने घर छोड़ने पड़े थे, सबसे पहले सड़कों पे यही लोग मर रहे थे. तो जब इन लोगों के बारे में बात होती, जो हमारे देश, हमारा समाज, हमारी जिंदगी बनाते हैं, तो इनकी जब कहानी की बात होती है, और खासतौर पे पैंडेमिक जिसका आपने जिक्र किया, तो ऐसी कहानियों को किसी भी रूप में जितना रूप में अडेप्ट किया जा सकता है किया जाना चाहिए.
Next question, please. Front row, please. The gentleman here, Balaji.
There seems to be no fixed formula whether an adaptation works or doesn't work. Maqbool worked. Omkara worked. Heather, I don't think worked very well. My Fair Lady didn't work at all, 1%. So I'm still, Devdas worked almost every time, including the Indian, the modern version, which is Muqaddar Ka Sikandar, which was like a modern day adaptation of Devdas. So really, there seems to be no formula, what works and what doesn't work. Are we saying that basically it's got to be a well-made film, adaptation or no adaptation? I'm just trying to find the logic behind this.
So it's more a comment, right? I mean, or would you like them to?
No, can you reflect on what seems to work? I mean, how does Devdas work almost every time, right? From Pramotesh Barua to Shah Rukh Khan.
So he's saying, how come Devdas works?
How does Devdas works
every time? But some adaptations like Shakespeare, he feels, for instance, Heather didn't really work. Heather, which was Vishal's adaptation of Hamlet.
Success of an adaptation is in the mind of the audience. Who can say? Some critics will be the audience and they will say कि ये बकवास था. Some will say कि ये brilliant था. वो तो होते रहता है. Worldwide cinema में, drama में, सब में. Now there are two stages there are two types of adaptation. For instance, to do Omkar or to do Maqbool, you had to transform from one language into another, and you had to take the cultural adaptation of one culture into another, right? That's a two-stage or three-stage adaptation. But I have worked on adaptations which are a one-stage adaptation, right? Even Devdas, you can say, was 1.5 stage, because I transformed the time and the place and this and that. But say a film which I wrote like Train to Pakistan, right? You take Kushwant Singh's novel, Train to Pakistan, and you say, ये film में कैसे हो सकती है? Now, the thing about a film, and this is possibly something that students of adaptation should learn, is that a film is not a novel. A film is a short story. क्योंकि वो 2 घंटे में खत्म हो जाती है, and you don't pick it up the next night to read the next chapter. It doesn't lie by your bedside. एक shot में film खत्म होती है, so the film is a short story. तो इस short story में you have to find the beginning, the middle and the end. Films होती है तो कुछ भी होता है. Web series में you have to catch with the first episode. You've got to catch the person's attention. तो web series का adaptation थोड़ा और होता है. लेकिन Train to Pakistan, to catch the attention of the, it doesn't begin very catchily. So to catch the attention of the viewer, I had to start with the main actor saying, "Ke मैं क्या करूं? लोग मर रहे हैं या," that sort of thing. So he has a monologue to start the film, right? So that was a one-step adaptation. The other kind of one-step adaptation is to take a whole life and turn it into a film, right? So
Biography.
a book like Bandit Queen, right? Fulan Devi ki story, wo pure mere haath mein story thi, actually written by my wife, my ex-wife, my late wife, Mala Sen. She'd written the book Bandit Queen. And it was from birth to death, you know, story, ye hua, fir wo hua. To turn it into a short story, you have to find a theme. You have to find, okay, this happened, then that happened. So you can reduce the theme to a few words. Now, a theme like Dr. Zhivago, right? You can say that is a story about love being defeated by history, right? A story like Lion King, you can say Hamlet with fur. But a story like Bandit Queen, uska kya ho sakta hai? So you say, this is a low caste birth, a woman who was born into the low caste, and the abuses of caste, the abuses that low caste suffer as in rape by higher caste, all sorts of things. And this is a story about rape and revenge. And that's what you had to reduce the entire novel to. Of course, incidents take place on the way, but that's what one had to do with Bandit Queen. Abraham Lincoln ki story dekhiye, when they said Abraham Lincoln ki biography, Oliver Stone makes it. It's not a story of birth to death of Abraham Lincoln. It's the story of how he fought in the democratic state of America to abolish slavery, or किस लिए किया और कैसे किया. And
Similar
you know,
was the
the
Churchill
contradictions.
film as well.
So they
right?
find, yeah. So he found the short story in that. Churchill ki baat yehi hui. Yeah. Gandhi was a bit like that, even though it went, Dickie Attenborough's Gandhi, it went a bit far. Can I tell an entertaining story about
Please,
Gandhi?
yeah.
Yes. Dickie Attenborough, the man who made Gandhi, Richard Attenborough, was the chairman of Channel 4, right? And I worked as the commissioning editor of Channel 4. So एक दिन हम आए यहाँ दिल्ली आए थे to interview Rajiv Gandhi for the television channel. And I came with Tariq Ali, who was a producer, and he gathered all his Trotskyist, Marxist friends, and they drank champagne and swam in the pool. They were champagne socialists, yeah. And you know, they sat around. They didn't like the film, and the Indian producer of Gandhi came to see me, and they were quite antagonistic to him. They said, "Why was this film made?" And he very cleverly said, the film was made to prove that Indira Gandhi was not Mahatma Gandhi's daughter. Yeah. So the Trotskyists didn't like it. I thought it was a good joke. I went back to London, and first day, Dickie Attenborough was meeting with people and so on. Darling boy, you've been to India. Whom did you meet? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So I said, I met so and so, so and so and so. And then people gathered around it. I said, I can't resist. I'll tell him the story. I said, he said, Gandhi was made to prove that Mahatma Gandhi was not Indira's father. And Dickie thought for a while, and then he said, yes, that's why it was made. That's precisely why it was made. And then he turned to the crowd, all the commissioning editors, and he said, but you know, I showed the film to a very prominent building in Washington, D.C. And the host in the building said, Mr. Attenborough, what a lovely film, and what a great job his daughter is doing in Delhi. Ronald Reagan.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. We have time for one last quick question if anybody is interested. Can you please give the mic? Yes. Quick.
Yeah, hi. So one thing that often comes up when we discuss about adaptation is the accuracy of it. Whenever you are adapting whenever you are adapting a historical piece, something that we often talk about is the accuracy of it. So when Bhansali made Bajirao Mastani, a lot of historians criticized the film and wanted to talk about the creative liberties taken by the director. So what do you think? Do you think the filmmaker owes it to the original text? Like there should be does an adaptation have to be very loyal to the original piece, epic, historical text or event, or can it have the creative liberties? Because it's a slippery slope, right?
Should the filmmaker be more concerned about historical accuracy, or is it enough that he sticks to, say, a book? Because Bajirao Mastani was based on a book.
Yeah, we live in interesting times. Insofar as history is always subjective. People have said that history is written by the people who win history, by the victors. History is very rarely written by the victims, right? But history is always subjective, you know. So I know the controversy about this particular film, and I don't know on what historical account or whose historical account it was based, and who the objectors to the history said, we have an alternative understanding of this history and so on. But I'll tell you a story. I went to the Goa Film Festival, right? And the big film at the Goa Film Festival was Alexander the Great by Oliver Stone, because it was American. And on the last day, they gave a party, right? They gave a party and of course, all the delegates, as will happen at the GLF, turned up at the party because it was an American party. So lots of free drinks, lots of free booze, lots of good food. And it was at the Taj Hotel. And there was this huge poster, a wall-sized poster of Alexander the Great, the film. And so I was standing in there in front with Derek Malcolm, a TV critic, and NDTV crew with a young reporter lady rushes up to me and says, and this is about historical accuracy. She says, Mr. Dhondy, what do you think of the film? I said, which film? And she said, this film, Alexander the Great. I said, you expect me to watch this film? So she said, why not? So I said, it's like asking a Jew to watch a film praising Hitler. She said, what? I said, I'm Parsi Zoroastrian, and this bastard destroyed our civilization. And he broke up Metropolis and burnt the library and killed our king. Yeah. And so she, poor child, she said, when did all this happen? I said
today's reporter.
326 BC. So,
I
so-
think
and
Dhoni
she
has
was
a lovely
astounded she didn't know what to
stories.
say.
I think Dhoni, you'll have to continue the stories outside. Our next session is about to begin. I'm so sorry. So thank you. Thank you. Anu could not join us. She was in a bad signal area. But huge thank you to Vinod Kapri, Farrukh Dhondy, and Nirupama Kotru ji. Thank
Okay.
you so very
Thank you.
much. Both Farrukh Dhondy and Vinod Kapri will be signing their books outside in the